the controlling class is not interested in having people understand this because, first of all, this leads to the causal factors, the understanding of the causal factors about why humanity is in the current conditions that we're in. Many people will have no answer for that. They don't understand the causal factors.
I'm Alan Watt, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 3rd of March, 2019. For those of you who are still getting whacked by winter, as I am here in fact, my sympathies go out to you because it's been a long, long winter this year, and it has really been a physically long winter, because here it started in September with snow, which didn't disappear right at the present time, and I'll still get a lot more snow yet, I'm sure, going into March, April, and maybe even beyond, who knows, because this happens once every 20 years or so, they say. It's not that unusual, although, of course, with geoengineering going on and all the testing they say that they're doing across the planet, from official statements from universities, they're involved in the geoengineering projects, that who knows what normal is anymore when it comes to weather control. Because that's the purpose of geoengineering, of course. And it's like that statement the US Air Force put out years ago saying, owning the weather. Look it up for yourself. But it's been happening. So this is the whole thing today. You're living in a system managed by experts from top to bottom of every aspect of your life, literally, even physically. You're managed by experts from birth to death. And that is the system that was dreamed about for centuries, actually, before H.G. Wells came along. He was one of the recipients of the knowledge to do with this world that people they'd be hard pressed to even define. But see, the whole idea of left, right, and all this kind of thing, and capitalism, communism, is all a strategy of systems, all owned by the same people. Experiments, if you will, too. And from the communist experiment, which is just collectivism on steroids in a sense, which is what they go into again, a more advanced form of it. You won't even probably have a name for it. They'll keep the same names, or you're living in a paradise, a democratic paradise. But in actual fact, it's a managed system run by scientists, those in academia, again planned and discussed and written about copiously for well over 100 years. You can get the books on it by many of the participants at the top, or at least near the top. And even the ones near the top, like the Huxleys and so on, admitted that they were not at the top. They were still a dominant minority who controlled everything and owned everything, basically, who ran the financial systems. Because everything, no matter what plan you have in mind, has to take into account this strange thing called money, or means of transactions and exchange and things like that, where it's a state that appears to be in charge of it, which it never is, or it's the private groups that are in charge of it, which is more true, I think. Then we find that they did all these experiments to find out how to control the whole planet better. They kept talking about, like I mentioned last week, about necessity and efficiency. Aldous Huxley said it probably come about because this drive for efficiency. He's not talking about tying your shoelaces or doing away with the shoelaces and putting Velcro on. He's talking about efficiency from those who saw themselves in charge already of the world. And if they could get more control over every aspect of every individual's life, like a standardization process, they would achieve their goals much more readily and easily. So that's where we are today. The creation of what appears to be 1,000 different fragments of a system, all pretending they're different, are really the parts of 1,000 points of light. As is what they call it in the occult. They've always called it that. George Bush Jr. called it that too. So did Senior. 1,000 points of light. Very occultic, working to bring about this utopia on earth for themselves, for their own progeny to control. as the rest of the unfit gradually die off. And they admit in the writings that they have all the time in the world to do it. Because our lives are pretty short. They are pretty short, really. The time you hit 40, you might think everything's just crawling. You wonder, you might be bored stiff waiting for it to pass quicker. Strange thing to say, but it's true. And then suddenly I'll just go on a roller coaster until you wonder what happened to all the years since. But the thing is, our lives are short. And because they're short, we're very short-term planners in a sense. Most folk think to the immediate future, especially men. And it used to be basic, very simple. It didn't always work out, but the fact is it was simple. You were young, you would get some kind of work, you would get married for one reason or another. And that was the way for a long, long time, for centuries. And once you were married, you got on with it, and you'd have children because there was no contraception at one point. And once the children came along, both the man and the woman would get stuck in. They're young, they're healthy, they're able to cope with it. And that's true enough. When you're young and healthy, there's less problems for the woman having childbirth in the first place. And coping with, because it takes a lot of energy, as you know, to bring up children. So that was it. There were no great expectations beyond that. And because you weren't working 12 to 14 hours a day, generally, by then, you'd already had big mass demonstrations and strikes to bring in shorter work weeks into a stage where you actually had time to go home and say hello to your, either your relatives or your wife or your husband or whatever it happened to be. And you had a chance to converse with them for a couple of hours before you hit the sack and slept, to get up early in the morning for the next work. So that was the whole idea of it. Before that, you didn't have much time, because under laissez-faire capitalism, as it was called, the capitalists who owned all the factories, and they owned the country, in fact, and they owned the armies. I mean, the armies didn't see it that way, but that's how it was. They were used for private corporations, businesses, on behalf of the crown, as they call it. And that's the way it was. You can criticise all you want, but that's the way it was. And lots of folk would join the army when there was no work. That was standard as well. And they were often given simple reasons for the wars, the empire and all that kind of thing. And they would believe in the propaganda, very basic, you're bringing civilization to whatever it happened to be. But in reality, it was for the benefit. In hindsight, we see it all. It's always in hindsight you see things. You see it was for really very incredibly wealthy managers of finance based in London, who ruled the whole system and the empire. And they used the empire really, and the whole idea of what Britain was, or the UK and so on, what it was actually a private enterprise for big business. Because once it started collapsing, people saw the devastation in the country. There was nothing set up for the people who literally were in poverty. They were demolished by high taxes. They were demolished by malnutrition from countless wars, one after the other. And they didn't even have safety nets, social safety nets, to finance the people when they were sick or dying. There was no national health service. That's something that people have got a hard time you got to bite on it at times and chew it, don't you? It's nasty, but that's the way it is. And indoctrination is a tremendously powerful thing. And it doesn't take long to indoctrinate people if the experts are involved in indoctrination. And that's the saddest, scariest thing, is that it can be done to any generation for any purpose that the masters require at the time. Today is just too perfect, with psychologists and behaviorists and all the rest of it working full time in big panels with government. Like big marketing, how do you put ideas across to the public? Like the behavioral insights teams, all psychologists. Psychology, remember, was dreamed up to control the public, folks. That's what it's for. That's what it's for. Psychiatry was going to go a step further by bringing in drugs with it. And don't forget the first drugs that Freud kept prescribing to even his friends, and himself, cocaine. And they had no problem with heroin and so on too. So this idea of using drugs on the public, the Soma idea, was nothing new. You find Huxley's Brave New World as well. It hasn't gone away. It's here today, bigger than ever actually, with the legitimization, or legalization, I should say, of all drugs. It isn't just marijuana. This will be legalized. They want to go the whole gambit because society is now literally to go over the abyss into the big depopulation program by those who control. And this is not conspiracy theory. It's not theory at all. I generally just quote by their books.
Conspiracy bullshit. Come on. You're a more intelligent man than that. Well, come on. I mean, come on. Listen, there has never been a conspiracy in this country.
I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago.
You know, is spending $1 million on that last 3 months of life for that patient, would it be better not to lay off those 10 teachers and to make that trade-off in medical costs? But that's called the death panel, and you're not supposed to have that discussion.
But of course, in any political system, there are sort of over-the-table and under-the-table arrangements.
The United States government actually did carry out on our citizens experiments involving radiation.
They put out themselves by authors who are in the big foundations that bring all this about. They're in the big think tanks that work with all governments, advising them on policy, generation after generation. That's the beauty of it, getting back to the short span of your life. Every foundation has a list of its own agendas to accomplish and work at, including to create more and more non-governmental organizations, to even recruit and train children to be the future leaders of these organizations in 20, 30 years, 40 years' time. And that's no conspiracy theory either. You can see it on their own websites. And they do this constantly. All the leaders you see getting churned out in front of you were picked a long time ago and trained for their positions. It doesn't even mean that they even believe in them themselves. Because you don't have to tell them all the facts involved where you want to go with an agenda. You don't even have to tell political parties what their whole agenda is. Political parties generally don't want to know. They just want to get in and to fill their pockets. And they get rewarded mightily. They all know this mightily from so many sources if they nod and go along with the policies that are put in front of them by people who are unelected. That's the reality of life. The school systems are such an amazing system, really, because it's got nothing to do with education. It's indoctrination of policy by those who own you, basically. That's what it's for. The reason that Aldous Huxley had no problem, as I talked about last week, about his agenda, the agenda that he saw for Brave New World coming into being, where the folk would float through it step by step, float into it with no real reaction against it. And eventually it would be there. It might take 100 years or 200 years, but it would come. It's here already, really, but it would come until everybody would fulfill their function in their strata of society, all the different types, all the way from the alpha, plus all the way down, for the division of labor, for their hive community to work efficiently. That's what it's all about. And that really is what it really is all about. And that's what he meant by efficiency. It would come about by efficiency. And you can go all the way back into Plato and all the other philosophers of his era who talked about life in general. These people had no real problems in the world, like Plato and Aristotle. They were all of a leisure class who could sit around and drink their wine and indulge in different things that would be, well, at one time people were horrified about, but the thing is, they could speculate. Their whole life was about speculation and humanity, and humanity's role and place in this universe of theirs that they saw. And they studied everybody. If you want to control nations, including just even your own nation, you must understand how people work. And so they add in every generation other observations on humanity and all segments of humanity and genders and everything else. And that's what they did. And so you find that Plato talked about efficiency and necessity. And he also had his book put out called The Republic, where that became basically almost like a Bible in esoteric circles. And for those who don't understand esoteric circles or esoteric lore, it isn't anything to do with vampire slayers on television. The occult is simply hidden. It means hidden. Those who wanted revolution to destroy the old power structures in society, like the Catholic Church, were often people from a different belief system who maybe wanted to dominate as well. You'll find all plays down through history. Don't believe that everyone's just either a winner or a loser. There's competition. There's always power plays between every group out there, even in all strata, even in the left wing. Power plays galore. And just need to satisfy what you think is your right to dominate others. And so you find that the occult has always been used to overthrow or try to overthrow existing power structures. And even in those who were the recipients of history and power within ruling organizations like the long-established churches, because they had incredible knowledge going way back up to the present time of real history as it happened by parchments and scrolls that were sent back and forth all the time, just like ancient Egypt did as well. And you had, and a lot of it haven't even been opened yet, apparently, even in the Vatican. There were so many coming in all the time, from all over the world. But they have them. And it was the same with Egypt. In fact, some cities in Egypt were built as centers for the origins of much of the empire's scroll making, going back from all the different parts of their empire. And we have their own histories of this too. There's still remnants of the histories of, and it was surprisingly efficient. It wasn't like haphazard, we'll come back in a few months with information on this outpost out so and so. No, the Egyptians had it within days sometimes, or a week. Very efficient. So you understand, humanity and this ruling over other people, so that a minority can live like kings and queens, is not new. And you had the minority at the top that was often called royalty, and then you had a priest class in ancient Egypt that were literate. They were a specialized class in different areas of ruling different segments of society. And they lived better than the peasants who had to till the ground and do all the hard, heavy work and supply all the things and make all the things that kept everybody else in luxury, the small minority. Nothing changed for really thousands of years, really, when you think about it, really. Huh? Nothing really changed until maybe the 20th century. When into the 19th century, you definitely had the empire idea of, say, Britain. It wasn't the only country, of course. France had it too, and other countries, and Holland had it for a while too. Even Belgium had colonies across different parts of the world, including Africa and the Belgian Congo. But you got to understand that these colonies really were to do for, as I say, for big business and resources for big businesses. And the ordinary people, even in their home countries, didn't benefit from it much at all. Life would go on as usual for ordinary peasant classes. We forget that in Britain, for instance, nothing would have changed if it hadn't been for the plagues, the Great Plagues. It killed so many of the serfs off. And serfs were bought and sold with the land. They were the property of the owners, the landlords. It's a nice term rather than say they're slaves, isn't it? But mind you, too, they could get branded if they moved off the land as we're buying and selling it. If they actually moved or ran away, they got branded. So we've got to, again, come back to reality and say, wait a minute here, what about this free ancient society? As I say, before the Normans came in with this massive organization that came with it of social management and lords and feudal lords and all the rest of it, it was a bit different and a bit more, I would think, more easy to comprehend as a more humane tribal system. But anyway, things go the way they go. And out of this drive for quotas and guaranteed incomes for lords, and they would pass up their income to the one above them, to the one above them, up to the royalty, up to the king eventually. That's how it worked. Then they wanted more efficiency, and that's really why, even with agriculture, more efficiency came in over time. Not because they wanted to feed more people and keep them happy, because most of the peasants, 60% I think it was, of their produce was taken from them for taxes. And out of the 40% that was left, they had to pay any higher labor that tacked themselves onto them, and had to pay for their foodstuffs for their animals, and keep themselves alive and so on, and for clothing, etc. So I cannot look at the past and think it was a sort of wonderful time. Although in amongst it all, I'm sure everybody, in little moments of their, or even in a holiday, one thing about the church is they gave them holidays, a lot of holidays at one time, and festivals, and during those times, we all, being human, can appreciate a nice, beautiful day and the things in nature that stick with you, like an instant of timelessness, as I always think of it. And that's what we these are the things that really make life more precious, I think. If it's all hell, then that can lead you to a different road altogether. But getting back to the occultic system is multi-layered, always. One by the ruling classes for themselves, another one for the helpers, the professional classes, as you call them, who manipulate all for efficiency's sake on behalf of the owners, the dominant minority. And then there's even lesser ones further down who believe in certain things to do with the occult, but they all believe in one thing for sure, is that you never tell the complete truth to the general population, the peasantry. That's never changed, never will change. Never. It's like I think that there's been different people in time made the same statement that, and I think Roosevelt was one of them, FDR said it too, he said for everything that happens, there's a good reason. That's one given to but then there's a real reason. That's never given to the public. It's therefore the same with those who are put in front of the public view, who have some kind of power as a helper. The Al Gores, that strata, who give little statements here and there, which you can pick up on and understand, really, if you understand much at all, that they're giving you two different messages, one for their own group and one for the general public. And for the true believers who are brainwashed at much even lower levels, lower strata, to do with environment, because the environment is and sustainability is the mantra they picked on, because eugenics got a dirty, dirty name because of World War II. Those at the top still believe in eugenics in a big way, and they have never ever changed their opinion on it, that they must change society, hence your Brave New World scenario of genetic alteration, and eventually the creation of the proper types to run the world and work in the world and live in the world, and not this haphazard idea of the old-fashioned way of simply passing on groups of genes, some of which might be, they claim, defective. So that's the whole idea of it. And like all movements way down, really all movements of revolution are a continuation of the same group, by predecessors, and often related, in fact, to the same people and families. Not always, but some of them certainly have been. And you go way back into the Middle Ages and find out the different retaliations of certain segments for the ruling oligarchies of their day, especially the churches, because they themselves, they had a separate religion. And the religion was couched in occultic language for their own safety. That way, if they were ever caught, they could always say they meant something else. And if no one had a dictionary of translations, then they couldn't be prosecuted. There's always the benefit of the doubt there, you see. Albert Pike said the same thing. He says, we never speak so plainly as when we do in public. And what he meant, but to other brother Masons, because the general public wouldn't catch on what they were saying. You find old talks by Manly P. Hall, which are kind of fascinating. He's a very old man talking at one of the philosophical clubs that he belonged to in organizations. And that was a popular thing too, the philosophical clubs, as they couched it too. He does go on about what had to be done. And he almost breaks beyond the boundaries of acceptable speech, because he's adamant on the fact there's too many of the wrong kinds of people in the world. Eugenics. And they always tied it in, too long before Al Gore came along, or any of the rest of them, they always tied it in to the same thing as eugenics. If people outbreed the ones who should be allowed to breed, if the general masses outbreed them, they'll use up all the resources. That was an old thing going way back into the 1700s and up to the present day. Hasn't changed. And so how do you get the people to stop breeding? Well, you create the problems, you see, that promoted promiscuity will create, which is unwanted pregnancies. And then you say, oh my goodness, look at this, oh dear, what we do. And then you introduce national health service systems, and then you perform abortions. So you must create the problem first of all, and then say, well, it's no longer a problem now. And you make it normal until people think, well, there's nothing, this is the normal thing to do when you get pregnant. So you can fulfill your goals with the general population by introducing that. It's been awfully successful, because from the 50s and running into the 1960s, and out came the pill, and the miniskirt at the same time, and promiscuity. Once you do that, then you're on the way of destroying the need for a family, the man, the woman, and children. And you can go on from there, you see, and they say it's been awfully, awfully successful in the West. And where you always find this dichotomy, this paradox, in a sense, of excuses, is where they conflict with each other. The ability to hold two opposing opinions in your head and believe in them both at the same time, as George Orwell said in 1984. Doublethink. Your own governments across the world have spokespeople who come out and tell you, there's too many of you. Way too many of you. We can't go on like this and sustain the country. As though they're supporting you. Huh? I mean, you're supporting them. And a lot less money than they're taking off you. But facts don't matter. So they're telling you this. And at the same time, they're telling you, because they say there's too many of you, then they're telling you there's not enough to pay taxes that we owe, or the money we owe the banks. So they've got to open the floodgates for mass migration. And that's the excuse for mass migration and the elimination of borders. You understand what I'm saying here? Which one is it? You think they'd be quite happy with folk dying off and fewer people? Huh? Do you really think they would risk their own elimination and disappearance at the top? Do you really think they'd do that? If it was purely because there's not enough folk to pay taxes? Do you really think that? So if they're not afraid of millions coming across Europe to add to the population, if they're not afraid of having to support all of them and what they're consuming, getting taken out of sustainability program, why would you at the same time say there's too many of you? Which one do you want? Less or more? Less or more? Simple, isn't it? But you'll never get a straight answer, because they have no straight answer to you. Again, there's always a good reason, and then there's a real reason. You'll never get told the real reason. You have to dig for yourselves. The elimination of borders is an old idea for those who gave you eugenics and who are alive and strong and well through over 1,000 think tanks and foundations all working together. And they're on their way to getting what they want. The elimination of national boundaries, a standardized society. They don't care about different colors or peoples or ethnic groups. If they can standardize them all with the same speech, the same understanding, the same new culture, that's what they hope to bring in eventually, then they can dominate and control all of you and then bring you down population-wise, or sterilize you. Like the West already going down the tube with sterility, as we know. It's one of the main problems that they have. It didn't happen by itself. And they'll never tell you either why it is happening. You're in a eugenics program, that's what I'm saying. And you were in it before you were actually born. And in the future, a lot will be more so in it because they won't be allowed to be born. That's part of it too. You have politicians coming out saying it now. They're reviving the old idea that came out all way back in H.G. Wells' day. Oh yeah, you know, and his co-founders too, like George Bernard Shaw, about the need to even have permission to have children. They're back to that again, you see. But again, don't forget, under eugenics, you serve the world state, as they say. Then you see your reward. You have lots of rewards, but one of them will have the right to pass your genes on into a new child, for a new child to be born. This has always been the same goal. That's what really is amazing to me. It's under this mass confusion that appears as mass confusion to the general public who don't have the time to go into all this stuff. Then they can really rush ahead with their agenda, which they're doing, of course. But also, their indoctrination techniques are so politicized and spread through all communication, all movies and books and novels and probably ads on television too. I don't know. I don't have TV. But so there you go. I mean, it's through everything by design, not because it's just chance or coincidence. And if you go into, as I say, the old occultic stuff, you'll find the discussions really of eugenics and even reincarnation. That was a big thing. That was often couched in reincarnation, for those who don't know. That the idea that, oh, you've been reincarnated so many times. Plato talked about it, didn't he? When he and his friend supposedly, in a little talk that they had, Plato says, why do you think we understand basic mathematics and geometry and things like that, you know, and others don't? And he gives an example of children. And he says, well, come here, boy, you know, and he gives him a little puzzle. And the little boy figures it out. He says, there you go, this little boy, why does he know that? Where other little boys won't know this, how to do this or how to do that. Because we've done it before, he said, we've lived before. So that was their way of justifying why they were superior. Superior is the word, you see. That was it. That hasn't changed. That really hasn't changed. And under that doctrine, I don't care what you want to call it, it's a doctrine or religion. Secular humanism is religion too, you know. And for those who say they believe in nothing except existentialism and humanism, they're in a religion. Because, strangely enough, their mind will go off. They might not, as long as they don't have a name to brand out with, they're quite happy. But they'll give you the same signs and symptoms of any other religion. Of what the Marxists were the same. You need an awful lot of faith to believe in that. Awful lot of faith. Because supposedly it was so complex, only the great leaders who designed it understood it. Isn't that beautiful? You find the same thing with occultism. It's often used as and it always was in polite circles, as a technique of communication, of superiority, of class amongst themselves, for those who don't quite get it.